welcome to episode 107 of the WannaCyber podcast. I'm here today with my dear friend Lori Brum. Lori has the unique privilege of having worked with me in my past role. And from that, she's endured our friendship for an extended period of time. I wanted to invite Lori today to talk about something that's near and dear to my heart. And that topic is interacting as an employee, coworker, or employer of people who are different. And I want to be gracious when I say, and I'm so excited you could join me today, but I feel like with that setup, there's a very strong implication there. So, Lori, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, and we'll get right into it.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me here. I appreciate that. Being in the position that I am in, I'm so lucky to be surrounded by some amazing people. Like having gotten to work with you, it was amazing to work with you. To sit across, I think we sat across the table at a Chili's or something one night, just going back and forth and having that open and honest dialogue and being authentic. So I think you asked me to tell you a little bit about myself. I've worked with SimSpace for a couple of years. But I think for me, my neurodivergence has really always stuck itself into computers and solving problems. And that's what I love to do and focus on. And when you brought up this podcast, I've been watching you for so long and I'm like, oh, I really do want to talk to him about different stuff like being neurodivergent and being a female in this space and what does it look like and how do I get out of my own shell, which is actually part of why I'm talking to you, is to face that fear that I have.
We've talked about it in the past that public speaking is not necessarily the center of your comfort zone. So
That would be correct.
this is a nice, I hope, I mean, maybe the better right way to say, I hope this is a nice way of easing into those sorts of things because on the one hand, it's just you and me. On the other hand, it's really just my mom who subscribes to my podcast at this point. It's really not a lot
That
of.
is not true because I've watched them.
So
So your mom keeps good company.
my mom is great. I'm a big fan, actually. So let's talk about it. We, like you said, we had that evening at Chili's, and then there was a follow on, I think, in North Carolina while we were watching like the awkward dance of nerds and salespeople interacting. Where it is interesting that there's people like us, neurodivergent people, are naturally drawn to this industry because for a whole variety of reasons. I hesitate to say because for me, I like the consistency of computers. I like that they remember things better than I do. I like a lot of things about that. I like that I get to interact with people, but I don't have to. So I can do that a little bit on my terms. But one of the things that I find shockingly absent in a lot of work environments is an awareness of that not everybody is here wants to interact in the same way, wants to return to the office, wants to have a big team building exercise that involves telling deeply personal factoids about yourself in front of the entire rest of the corporate. Those sorts of things can be really overwhelming when to
Oh,
a person
yeah.
who is neurotypical or just differently neurodivergent, that is not only not intimidating, it's fun. It's natural.
It's so ingrained in our culture. If you don't mind me for a moment interrupting you, it's so ingrained in our culture to do certain things. Like when I say culture in this instance, work culture. And one of the things, it's a well meaning thing, but to say, tell us something about yourself. To your point, tell us something about yourself. And I remember, and not naming any names or anything, I was asked, what is the most recent book that you've read? And again, you already hit on the fact that I'm not a huge person to get out there and speak in front of a whole group. Yes, I've worked at Build-A-Bear Workshop. I was a great party bear. Yes, I've done scouts, but all those people are under like 5 foot and they're a lot. They might be meaner in some ways, but they're a lot less judgy. They're there to have fun. And I know that, right? So when you're in front of your would-be peers and you're asked a question, it's terrifying. And I know that I was asked, what is the most recent book you read? And I was reading How to Be an Anti-Racist. And I was so terrified in that moment. How do I say this? How do I say, as a woman coming into this company, that this is the book that I'm reading because I am passionate about? And I choked. And do you know what I ended up saying? that I was reading.
I'm gonna go with the Bible.
No, not the Bible. That probably would have been better. I looked around, panicked, and I saw green eggs and ham. And I told all my would-be peers that I was in fact reading green eggs and ham because
I
that is such a terrifying question.
I have before I came to SimSpace, I taught in the classroom for many years. And there are often times when you get asked questions in the classroom where an honest answer would get you a negative review from some. For
Okay,
instance,
yeah.
if I gave the answer, the Bible, there might be someone in the classroom who's, whoa, why are you pushing your beliefs on me? If I gave the answer, how to be an anti-racist, there was the guy with the Confederate flag patch on his backpack who later that
Mm.
week came into work in a full Confederate battle uniform. I don't like a reenactor. And I was like,
Ew,
sorry, bud. No, you're going to
that
have
is
to.
so
It
anxiety
turned into a
inducing.
whole
Oh
thing.
my
And
god.
I know.
Wow.
And the point is, like, people are people, right? They're
Mm.
infinite. They are unique. They are wonderful. They're weird. They are different. And what makes perfect sense to me may not to others. And so oftentimes something like that, I'm sure in your head you saw green eggs and hams and thought, yes,
It's
Lordy slides it at home and beats out the tag.
I got words out of my mouth. They made sense. They were in an order. It is a book. I
Yep.
have kids. It all makes
It's
sense.
perfect. Yeah. No, and think about that. So your very understandable desire to avoid all kinds of potential outcomes with that answer led to a lack of authenticity in the workplace that you were
Yeah.
are you opposed morally or ethically to green eggs and ham? No. Is it contrary to your I don't think.
It does push the boundaries of consent. Dude, he said no. I'm glad he finally likes it, but you need it. Like, we didn't need 20 pages of this. Like,
True.
we could
It's
have
true. It does
finished it.
teach children to be boundary pushers. I had not considered that.
It is problematic, but
I had
considering I
genuinely
had
not considered that.
you also have to realize I had Jacob, and so I had worked at my previous location up until about a week or a month or something before I had him, and then we moved, and so he was about, like, a year old, and I need to get back to work. I wanna support myself, and Pete, I am not good. Bless moms and dads and parents who can stay at home and do that. I am not one of those people. I have to have things to my mind to digest. Yeah, I was very worried at that moment. If I said something like the Bible or how to be anti-racist or whatever, that would be at all something that would spur somebody to say, you know what? I don't know if this person's gonna be right for us. I was terrified in that moment. And then what I said, I'm not sure that it was any better.
I'm glad you brought that up. I told you in advance that one of the things I wanted to bring up is my own I have anxiety. I was gonna say
Mhm.
I've struggled with anxiety, but I don't think that's true. I think it's one, I take to help with the anxiety,
That's not true. Look at you, that you are so successful.
but
You manage well.
one of the things that struck me is it's so funny because I don't as I think about my anxiety, I keep expecting because of my neurodivergence, I want to approach it logic. And so I'm like, this fear is illogical. I used to get anxious on airplanes, and I'm like, this is ridiculous. Like, I could today, I know as a fact today, thousands of airplanes flew, and if 50% of them didn't make it, no one would be getting on the plane with me. Like, it's zero. It's safe. It's 0% risk. Like, it is safe. I think there's an obligatory Boeing joke out there, but I'm gonna let it slide because I hear they're making new missiles.
Yeah, we don't wanna foster somebody else's here either.
But I want to approach it logically, and it doesn't matter. The logic doesn't matter. This is for me, it's a limbic system. My body is just reacting. How do you, how would you counsel? This is what I'm hoping to ask. First of all, how would you counsel me on the three aspects that we were talking about? One, as an employee, as Pete, what do I do, ironically, as an anxious person, as an employee to protect myself as it comes to interrelation with my employer or the workforce, whatever?
That's such a wonderful question and such a deep question, and it has so many different vectors in it because we have so much layers. It have so many layers in our personalities, and protecting our inner peace is so pivotal. I know that a lot of times when I look around and I see other people. I know they're just as anxious as I am. They're just as afraid as Pete that you're going to be judged for how well you climb a tree, but you're really a lobster, right? Like those two things, you can't judge somebody on that. And I think number one, the most important thing is to realize that everybody has an opinion or a perception of Pete. And it's not Pete's perception, it's their perception. So if they're mad at Pete, they're mad at their perception of you. And that's their problem, unless they want to bring it over and say, Pete, you broke this widget, and then give you an opportunity to fix it. Otherwise, that's their perception, and there is not anything you can do to change that. And protecting that portion, and at least of me, like my heart, like that's how I protect me. And I would hope other people protect themselves that way. That's how I try to protect the people I work with, my team, everybody. Unless somebody can actually bring something to my front door, then you only have a problem with the perception of me that you've built. Nothing I've done, you
I
know?
like that thought a lot because so the rest of the story is I had a prior employer who used to jokingly for him fire, and
Mm.
he would about twice a week we'd be in a call and be like, "Hey Pete, I'm gonna have to let you go." And I knew he was joking.
Yeah, but
He
that's
knew he
hard.
was joking. And the thing is, logically, I knew as a fact, I was an instructor at the time. I was their lead instructor for the company. I had just been promoted because I consistently got the best reviews. I could teach the most classes. To be honest, I was certain I was by far and away their most profitable employee because they could just plug and play me into anything. So the
Mhm.
odds that I was actually getting fired were 0. And so to that person, it was a funny, quirky, and it's really funny because I'm convinced that person is neurodivergent, and to say something that is not so is commonly very funny to neurodivergence. So you look at something, you're like, obviously, this is nuts. I will speak this thing that is nuts. And you too will be aware that is nuts. Obviously not. And we will be amused by the incongruity, and both of us will bond as a result. And that was what the intent was, right?
Yeah.
It caused me to have a panic attack and end up in the hospital over the course of because it persisted for about a year, and the really interesting thing is I didn't realize that it was affecting me, and so I didn't advocate for myself as an employee, and it sounds like one of the things you're saying is you said their image of you in their head is not yours, and it sounds to me like what you're advising is bring those 2 closer together. Tell the especially it should be a safe space there.
Mhm.
Be honest about what you're feeling, how and why, where you're coming from, strengths and weaknesses, struggles even.
It's
That gives them a chance
absolutely.
because I know his heart, he never would have done that intentionally.
Mhm. And that's so those 2 things. One, authenticity. It shouldn't be so rare, but it is so rare to find a place that we can bring our entire selves to the table. Where I am now, right, with the people I work with and the people I work for, I feel like I've been empowered. I have found my voice. I can bring my whole self. But not everybody gets to do that, right? Not everybody gets to marry those 2 things up and say, "Hey, Bob, I really don't like it when you do that." And up until recently, and I'm sure a lot of females may be able to relate with this, and I know a lot of neurodivergent folks are going to be able to relate with this, especially as those are layered even more with other intersectionalities. The fact of the matter is sometimes you can't be vulnerable enough to bring those 2 instances together. So you have to make a choice to say, you know what, Bob, you can have that perception of me. It doesn't affect me. And if it does affect me, if that affects what I do or how I do it, then I would hope I would have the privilege to go find something else and to be a standout somewhere else. But it's hard to be authentic, and that's really important
I
and
agree.
vulnerable.
Yeah, I agree completely. All right, so let's flip it around. As a coworker of Pete in a situation like that, you're sitting there in a meeting, you hear person X jokingly fire Pete, and you're an ally of Pete, presumably, I hope. You're here. Um,
100% Team Pete.
so you hear that, but you know about my anxiety. What do you
So I'm going to come back to that real quick because I want to tell you 2 things that recently happened, and they speak directly to this. I was always afraid I wouldn't have a voice in that moment. Um, you know how you have really scary dream? I have night terrors and stuff, and you can't scream. Your voice is gone. No matter how hard you try, you can't scream. And recently there was 2 situations I was in. One, I was in a plane and they were trying to push the kid in front of me. They were like, "No." And they were trying to go in front of him because he needed to get his bag. And the line of people just kept going, Pete. And this poor kid is like 15, 16, and what is he gonna do? So I stuck my hand out and I said, "No, we take turns." And I made them back up and I made them hand me his luggage and I handed it to him and we went off the plane. And I was very proud about that. And in that moment, I would like to look at that person and I would like to think that my throat and I would be able to speak because I would be just as anxious as you are hearing that because I would be feeling it too. And I would flat out probably tell that person, maybe not right at that moment. I might take them aside if I felt like, hey, maybe they don't understand what they're doing. Maybe they're thinking they're bonding. But in that moment, I think I would comfort you first and then deal with that person. Because to me, your heart, your feelings, I would feel that would be more important at the moment. And then I would take that person and say, look, we don't think that's very funny. I don't think it's appropriate. I don't think it's nice. I think that you might think it's funny, but by joking in that way, it's actually causing this dynamic of uncertainty with everybody that nobody needs to have.
I have often thought what it would be like to have been actually fired by him because I don't know if I would have known,
Yeah, because he didn't think that would ever be an eventuality.
which is I think that was the whole point is he couldn't conceive of a situation. And so therefore, again, it's incongruous, so it's funny, but
Mhm.
yeah. Yeah, okay. I like that
Ye
you're step 1, you're speaking up to the person you care about, and step 2, you're trying to prevent it from happening again because you're right. That order of operations makes a lot of sense to me. And interestingly, because I have the kind of neurodivergence that comes with a strong sense of justice, I probably wouldn't have done it in that order. I probably would have been like, "I see a wrong, I must correct it," and hopped on my noble steed and ridden off into do battle. And
Yeah,
that's probably because 'cause you're exactly right. At that point, it's done, at that point. So, correcting the behavior should take a back seat to the person who
stop the
I've only
bleed.
recently learned their feelings matter a great deal.
Yeah,
Uh, it I know that's a funny thing to say, but it took me time to recognize that. I think that's a post-military mentality recovery type thing where, okay, all those years when you're told you're not a special snowflake, but actually it turns out you really legitimately are.
you have emotions and feelings, and sometimes they're big. It's funny because my type of neurodivergence, I don't understand certain constructs and emotions the same as other people do. But I understand empathy and pain, just not necessarily for myself. So I struggle to have more grace with myself than I do with other people. I'm very much like I said, stop the bleed. If somebody hurts my child and they're hurting my child, whew, not a good position to be in. Not a good position to be in because I'm going to stop that situation immediately and I'm going to care about my child. But on the same token, I will totally trip that person so that they can't get away from justice. So there's that like sense of justice coming back. But importantly, like, taking care of people the other situation, well, I said I had 2 situations. The other situation that recently happened is you always think, will you act out? Will you act quickly enough? Will you stand up? Will you do what you need to do? And recently I was in a situation where in an enclosed area, somebody upset a horse reared. There's only one exit and there's an older lady standing next to me. And we are between the horse and him getting out of that area where he just reared in a very closed and small space. And I often would wonder, would I do the right thing? I immediately grabbed her, damn near picked her up, carried her over the threshold, pushed her to the side gently, and then went and got the horse. And I think it's the same thing for people in a situation, whether it's verbal or anything. Like sometimes you just have to get them out of the situation. If it's toxic, if it's a bad situation, you can't always take on the whole board of directors, but I
Right.
can get you out of there.
I struggle with that. I struggle with tilting at windmills. There's no two ways about it. That I think to myself, that's not perfect. I had a supervisor back then. He was 2 levels up the organization from me. And he would regularly say, "Don't make perfect the enemy of good." And on the one
Yeah.
hand, I think that can be used as an excuse sometimes, but it wasn't in his case. His case was saying, "Give yourself a break. Cut yourself some slack. You've done really good work. Enjoy that. appreciate it. Your team is doing really good work. It's essentially he was basically saying, touch grass, ground yourself. You're doing well. And what I think about actually and is the difference between those two supervisors. They were both kind men, similar ages, similar backgrounds, similar educational backgrounds. But I cannot imagine his name is Chris Betts. He's actually the CISO for AWS now, naturally. And you know what? They're lucky to have him. I cannot imagine Chris directing his humor like at another's expense. Like I can't conceive.
Mhm.
And that I think that's one of the things that strikes me is that two people similar, actually, they both worked at the same organization at times. And but just came away from it with such a different and actually it's only slightly different. It was just slightly different because again, to the boss who fired me, I'm certain he was thinking that he was actually praising me because anyone would know how valuable you are. And this is just a way of calling attention to what an excellent job you're doing.
Yeah.
But because as I think back on it, oftentimes it was like, no, actually, we got really good feedback from. But what I remember is not the praise that followed it. What I remember is the anxiety that came from the situation and like even taking calls
Yeah.
from him, I'd be really extra.
Well, I was thinking about it. I did want to bring up the fact that I think when we talk about what we do with our coworkers and what we do with our employees, our employers, and stuff like that, one of the things that I'm very grateful for is to finally be in a place that I've been surrounded by people like you and Paul and Craig, who and my team members, Brian. These people have literally empowered me. And instead of looking at me, you're weird, or why are you obsessing over this one thing, or why are you using Excel as a database? Don't come at me. I'm just saying, whatever it is, literally not only have invited me to the table, but have made sure I have a space there that I feel comfortable. And that if something doesn't feel right, have listened to me and have been like, hey, yeah, that's weird. I agree with you. Or, yeah, here's another way to think about it. And offering those honest perspectives is so important because being neurodivergent, you're never quite sure. Are you in your own head? Are you not in your own head? Are other people going to see it this way? Or are you just babbling? And it's really important to have clear headed people who can be honest and authentic back. And who also, when you speak up and you say, hey, this is going on, they'll say, oh, I didn't realize that, and adjust and actually mean it. It's huge.
I
So
There are not many Paul Winters out there, which is a shame. But we looked into
there
cloning
should be.
and it is prohibitive from a cost
This-
perspective, which is again a shame.
he could be the next Dolly, though. Come on.
Then he'd have to raise himself. But the truth is that it's actually one of the really important things is you're telling me how enabled, how empowered, how trusted you feel safe. That's really at the core of it. You feel. Where does that
Yep.
come from in your organization? That stops, like it is Paul that comes from. I think a lot of that comes from I don't think I've met so many people with as strong a sense of self. Boy, this is gonna embarrass him too, by the way, if he ever finds out we had this conversation publicly about it.
He'll
But he has
never
such
know.
a
Nobody will ever
strong
tell him.
sense of self that he knows who he is, he knows who he wants to be, and he just does that. Sociopath, he does what he wants to do. But it is kind, it is supportive. One of the things is that for this conversation, I didn't really put together much of an agenda because I wanted to embrace the awkward because it is awkward at times to be kind, to be supportive, to be vulnerable, to be present in certain moments, circumstances, whatever. There are times where I know I have seen people and I've said, I would like to make things better and I have no idea how to go about it. And actually, I wrote a note to a friend of mine whose father passed away. I cared deeply about him as a person and I had no idea what to say. And so I was genuinely considering not writing a note. And instead, I wrote a note that said, I care deeply about you as a person. I have no idea what to do. I care about you.
That's
And
enough.
to be honest, it was not spoken about that before, but it was the best that I had. And you mentioned earlier authenticity. And a lot of times being authentic is just like bringing the best you've got and letting the work that you've done in the past with those other people spackle over the imperfection, so to speak.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, it's funny because it's hard to be authentic. And as we have this conversation, I just keep reflecting on how damn privileged we are in this position to be able to say that we can show up authentically. And it goes back to the empathy part, right? Like you have a high justice seeking part, which that's how I've always been up until probably, I don't know, 10 years ago. I switched to a empathy part, but I think the core of the two things are the same, right? It's like love and hate, which is something I remember Ron told me one day, we were just talking back and forth, Ron Gorman, and he's love and hate are literally the same emotion. They're just different sides of it, right? And so I care about people so deeply. And we're having this wonderful conversation. And I just keep wondering, like, how can we best take the intersectionality of other people and embrace them and bring them more so in and care about every aspect of them? Because just like you can't stop being a man when you go to work, I can't stop being a woman. That's my identity, right? I can't stop loving horses. There's a reason I'm, like, tattooed with them. I love them. It's me. I will probably my mom is 74 and still rides, goes to the barn every day. I will probably always do that. That's always gonna be a part of me. Now, granted, I might not take that into cybersecurity so much unless we're talking about Trojan horses, totally different. Like, how do we support these people around us? And I know that for, like, my team, it's trusting them the way that Paul trusts me, and the way that I trusted you and you trust me, and that I never think that you're coming at me with a malicious thought. Going back to your supervisor who, in their mind, they were like, "Oh, you're gonna be fired today." But when you have anxiety and you have imposter syndrome and you're not sure if you're doing a good enough job, I literally question myself on the daily. What have I done today? What can I do better? As a human being, as a mother, as a sister, all those different personalities, how can I help all those people I care about? And then how can I help the people that don't know that I'm thinking about them? The children in Congo or the people everywhere across the world, like, how can I help them? And how can we be authentic and genuine enough that other people see us and they go, oh, that Pete guy, he's pretty cool. He's, like, authentic and he's, like, genuine, and he doesn't have to worry about whether he told somebody that he's, like, a Red Bull. I don't know, what do they do? Fly really weird boats and stuff off of ramps or
Oh, the
something?
floats
Like,
out. Yeah.
you don't have to build this whole persona because you're you. So how do we bring more of that to the table?
First of all, I agree entirely that I think many of the people that I respect a great deal, I consistently think of how strong, solid they seem. And what I mean by that, what I said about Paul, that strong sense of self. They know who they are, they know who they want to be. They do it, they make it look effortless because there's nothing that they're faking at that point.
Mm.
When I was a young man, I was maybe 10, 12 years old, I heard my dad joking with some friends. And one of the great things is he often included me in those conversations with the adult conversations. So I
Nice.
heard the good, important thoughts as a young man. But occasionally I heard something that I didn't really understand yet. And my dad jokingly said, if you can fake sincerity, you've got it made. And I was like, I want to have it made. So I need to figure out how to do this. And what I learned very quickly is I cannot. Now, there may be people who can, and that's the subject of perhaps an entirely different podcast, but I
Mhm.
can't. And so what this circumstance happenstance of my dad making this throwaway comment that got a chuckle out of maybe two of his friends who were present was I took it upon myself that I realized that the only kind of sincerity I could is I can learn to be sincerely interested in people. And that's what I learned from this throwaway comment from my dad is just be sincerely interested in people even people you have very little in common with, there's something about them that you're going to find fascinating. And lots of people enjoy talking about themselves, as I am right now, talking about myself. But it gives you an opportunity to find common ground, learn something new about somebody, and then, you can be sincerely interested in someone. And my point isn't about the interest, but the point is about the sincerity. That's the important thing. Paul is impressive because he's sincere when he says, "Hey, is there anything I can do?" It's not a throwaway line out of social obligation. It is, he really would do anything he could for you in that moment. And it is much simpler to be, uh, to just be you. There's nothing to keep track of. You don't, like you said, you don't have to keep track of anything now.
You're not fabricating, and it's hard though. And I'll caveat that with, it's hard because sometimes my daughter's 22 and she's doing the EMT thing, she's doing the medical thing, and I don't know who I am.
Mm.
And her and I've talked a lot about that. And it's really easy for her to fall down the social media rabbit hole of watching reel after reel or Snapchat or what is it, TikTok or whatever the thing is today. And it's really hard to find that where you want to be. But the thing that I guess I would say is when I think about those people, I try to stay focused on joy and focus on curiosity. And I think sincerity comes from curiosity. And of course, it's not in my mind at the moment, but I'll remember it at 2:31 this morning. I promise you. I'll text you and I'll let you know what it was. But President Obama had a quote about approaching everything with curiosity and asking questions, because by asking those questions, we can find that common ground, right? Eventually, if you ask enough questions, you'll eventually find some kind of common ground, whether it's figgy pudding or I don't know, Duck Dynasty or whatever that show is. I'm sure there's some kind of common ground between even the two most different people in the world. So hopefully that kind of rings true, is just that discovery portion. And I do feel like watching my daughter and other young children go through and not know. I've got my 16-year-old who has known since he was 4 that he wanted to be a marine biologist. He sat when he was 8 at lectures by Sylvia Earle, and I don't know any other 8-year-old who's what I would like to do today is go listen to Dr. Sylvia Earle, who it's amazing. That's not on the top of many 8-year-olds list. And then I've got, again, my 22-year-old whose heart is as big as Texas and she loves and cares for everybody going, what do I want to do? So it's that dichotomy that I'm sure so many people who struggle with anxiety and did I get it right? And am I being me right enough? Or am I doing good enough? Struggle with quite a journey.
Thank you for listening to this episode of WannaCyber. Join us again next week as we continue our conversation with Lori about her life and experiences as a woman in cybersecurity. And as always, like, share, and subscribe.